In 2014, the Self, Motivation, and Virtue Project began, with the intention of funding cutting-edge research on virtue and moral development.
Welcome to the opening event of the Self, Motivation, and Virtue Project, generously funded by the Templeton Religion Trust.
Nancy Snow, the director of the Institute for the Study of Human Flourishing and professor of philosophy at the University of Oklahoma, and Darsha Narvaez, professor of psychology at the University of Notre Dame, initiated the SMV project to support innovative, interdisciplinary, moral self-research.
I was convinced that the study of virtue requires more of the study of motivation, and that gets us into conceptions of the self. And research had primarily been done in psychology using the personality framework. And so using the self framework gives us a different perspective.
The project is designed to fund multiple research projects. And so we organized a system of selection of teams.
They curated a core project team to open avenues of inquiry into virtue. The core project team is an interdisciplinary group of scholars, each of them well respected in their field, who reviewed grant applications and serve as a board of advisors.
We wanted to emphasize the interdisciplinarity of the teams, and so that was a primary criterion of selection.
The SMV project aimed to explore new ways of measuring virtue and how it develops in humans. 10 teams were chosen from a pool of 170 applicants from 27 countries. They delved into investigations of the self from a variety of disciplines, including psychology, philosophy, sociology, contemplative humanities, human development, and education.
I'm especially happy that deep integration seems to have worked so well for our teams, and very happy that our discussion of deep integration focused on how to change the professions and make them more congenial for younger researchers who want to do this kind of interdisciplinary work.
I think in this project, the emphasis, the kind of explicit emphasis on deep integration is different. So a lot of the other projects that I've been a part of, that's kind of an assumption that there's an interdisciplinary approach to the research. But here, they're sort of forcing us to think about it.
Since we had to find ways to cross methods and integrate methods, it generated a lot more discussion on people about, we had a lot of specific decisions about what you're going to do that required input from all the different parts of the team.
So we spent the first year really looking for opportunities to integrate Buddhist studies with psychology to come up with specific measurements and ways to actually measure these Buddhist constructs, which typically don't make it into a scientific study.
To actually learn how to do qualitative interviewing and learn how the coding works and be involved in that process and the participant observation process, but then also actually interpreting what people are saying with Dawn, who's has expertise in things that I don't have expertise on. It made me realize how sometimes oversimplified and impoverished pure philosophical thinking is at least about certain important questions in ethics. But it also made me realize that even if I were doing the interviews by myself, with the lens of philosophy, I would be missing out on such a rich interpretive lens that she brings with her expertise in sociology.
Collaborating with Brad was very different than what I've done in the past on research projects. So I've only ever collaborated with other empirical researchers, so having a philosophical analysis along with what we were doing deepened the work that we did, I think, many times, and I think gave us a better appreciation for where our position was in terms of the research.
I think that the interaction with Michael has been the distinctive feature of it. The disciplinary gulf between us is palpable. It's what we regard as important or as rational and appropriate is quite different, I think, quite divergent. Although we both have a deep appreciation of one another's disciplines and of the depth of that they're capable of.
we really like what we know, and we haven't yet developed enough of a branching out to really knowing what it is that we like, by which I mean that which lends real insight into the complexity of that which fascinates us, with which we need to grapple and understand if we're really going to make progress as a human community. And this is where I find this interaction differs. It's on a different level because there are these concerns.
The SMV teams met challenges and exceeded anticipated goals in research and methodological innovation.
Creating the salience of focus on the role of self and motivation in virtue, and that I think people have always known that that's important, but I think they've really made it salient now in a way that will really be helpful for getting a purchase on what makes people be virtuous.
So for me, I think one of the biggest benefits has been having this establishing like a working relationship that we can, so we're applying for another grant. We applied for a grant that we successfully we succeeded in, and we're applying for a third grant, and that's really cool for me.
Brad is working on a paper right now. He's the first author on it that's going to be in the Journal of Moral Education.
Yes, that'll be the first thing, and then
Yeah.
there'll be probably, I don't know, many experimental publications. So we're trying to also probably we might end up doing a second one philosophy, so we'll end up probably with one or two, probably two philosophy articles, and then several empirical psychology articles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I think to talk about the study of virtue and self is to think in much more global terms than where I think the advances are going to occur. Because in the 10 projects that have been developed over the last couple of years, we have watched research teams struggle together with how to define everything from generosity to humility to shame. I think that at that level, we have got we've got a cohort of young scholars who are thinking differently about the topics that interest them than they did before they went into it. My experience with multidisciplinary projects like this is that we see the fruits of that collaboration unfolding in the years to come. So I think we're going to find ideas infiltrating psychological literatures that would not have been there beforehand. The same thing I think will be true in the philosophical literature as well.
And I think in terms of our research, we are probably not as close to having a good takeaway as some of the projects because we're doing this longitudinal study, right? So we're still collecting data. We're going to collect another wave of data in the fall, and we're tracking people over time. And to get the full understanding of what it means, it's going to probably take a bit longer than some projects. So what we talked about today with the group was just establishing, I think, some basic validity of our approach, which is that we can study people's idiosyncratic personal projects and goals and make contact with different ways of thinking about well-being, the way psychologists think about well-being, the way philosophers think about well-being.
There have been several groups that have worked in investigating virtue in what you might call, as one of our researchers calls it, non-ideal theory. So philosophers usually study virtue in abstraction, and we're very theoretical. And what this research has done is enable philosophers to be put in dialogue with psychologists and neuroscientists and investigate virtue in situ, in various contexts in the world. So, for example, we have a concept of, interactive humility coming out of research into L'Arche communities. And so we have, people who are investigating virtues in the context of different communities.
One of the things that I'm excited about is presenting some of what we have discovered through the generosity of Homeboy and L'Arche, presenting it back to Homeboy and L'Arche in ways that are easily dialogable, right? That facilitate ease of conversation, minimize jargon, minimize the sort of academic ease that I can certainly feel myself often get trapped in. And so in some small way, I think we've been able to build a collaboration that has drawn out gifts that the communities themselves may not even be aware that they have. That's kind of my hope, to continue that, and then we'll see what happens from that. If that goes well, I don't think that this work will end. How could it?
So if you want to get a comprehensive and deep view of what's going on, you have to look outside of your own discipline and expand your horizons. And it's going to be exciting. So it will enliven disciplines which might be a little stale at some points. So the advice that I have is to follow your heart and follow your interests.
And I would suggest that you find those collaborators from other disciplines who excite your imagination, and then be patient as you negotiate concepts and definitions and methods, and be open-minded and then humble, and be willing to learn new things and new ways of being.